Okay, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us here today at the Cryosphere Pavilion. My name is Ana Gomes, and I work as a researcher at CIMAR, which is an institute in Portugal, and I work with Arctic marine bacteria. So today I would like to introduce our first presentation of the day, which is titled Mountains of Opportunity, How to Leverage Funding for Adaptation. And with that, I will give the floor to our speakers.
Yes, hello everyone, welcome, and thank you all so much for joining us here on a Sunday morning. I very much appreciate that, both in person and online. My name is Alex Mackey, and I'm a project manager at Zoe Environment Network. And today I'm going to be moderating the discussion as well as giving a little bit of an introduction. So with that, this event was organized by the Adaptation at Altitude program, which is a program organized by the Swiss Agency for Development and Cooperation, with the aim of increasing the resilience and adaptive capacity of mountains around the world. So this program is organized by several different partners. You can see here on the screen, and we work in mountain issues from all over the world. So just to give a little bit of context here today, when we think of climate change, oftentimes the first ecosystem that comes to mind is not necessarily mountain areas. However, mountains are actually really key for adaptation action and for responding to climate change. So not only are they highly vulnerable to climate change and impacts, but they also have very rugged, harsh conditions and oftentimes lack some of the basic infrastructure that is needed to ensure resilience to these changes. Mountains also face rapid temperature warming, which happens at a rate much faster than it happens downstream. This leads to melting glaciers. I'm currently based in Switzerland, and some of the startling statistics are that in the last 2 years, actually 10% of the glaciers in Switzerland have the mass has actually melted away. So this is quite startling, and if we do surpass that 2 degrees Celsius warming, we will see that many of the world's glaciers, no matter where they are going to pass tipping points with irreversible melting. So it's quite a serious issue. There's also issues of changing precipitation patterns. Often, as there is less rainfall available, this leads to droughts, which impacts the agriculture in mountain areas and can also lead to increased wildfires. At the same time, the increased precipitation in some areas causes flooding, which can also lead to other natural hazards such as landslides and avalanches and a whole host of others. So climate change impacts in the mountains also, they're particularly large scale. As we know, many of mountain ranges are transboundary. They're not something that is just in one country, but have to be responded to across borders and have impacts that also affect across borders. And many of the issues that occur in the mountains are also cascading, which means what happens upstream actually impacts those of us living downstream. So if you think about flooding and glacial melt that happens in the mountains, that actually has huge impacts on the cities that are below them as well. So this is something that is not just an isolated issue. So why we brought that here today is looking at all of these adaptation issues. We're going to have to mobilize a lot more adaptation funding. If many of you have seen the UNEP Adaptation Gap Report of 2023, it has a lot more information. But I do just want to draw attention to the fact that the adaptation finance gap is standing between 194 and 366 billion US dollars per year. So that is a huge gap. I won't go too much into this right now, but I will say there is a case study that was proposed by Adaptation at Altitude project partners, which does talk a little bit more about the mountain cryosphere if you're interested in learning more information. So focusing on mountains a little bit now. Adaptation at Altitude also launched a brief earlier this year, authored by Simon Allen from the University of Geneva, which looks at where the public funding of adaptation is going, and is it going to the mountain regions most in need. So this brief examined more than 7,000 adaptation projects that happen around the world, and it found that between 2011 and 2019, only 6% of the bilaterally and multilaterally funded adaptation projects actually targeted mountain regions. So that left us with 444 projects that we looked at, and you can see this graphic on the left, the green circles that shows that by and large, it mostly is coming from multilateral funding. That's where the public finance is coming from. Looking at the map, we see the countries in purple that are receiving aid, and in green, you see where the aid is flowing from. We do see that there's not necessarily a geographic balance, even though mountains have a vast geographic spread. And then on the right-hand side there, we see that mountain finance is flowing to vulnerable countries, but not the most vulnerable countries. So we see that there is still kind of a gap there when we look at this public finance situation. So I want to bring back to a little bit of a positive example here. So we see that there is a gap in funding, but looking at some of the opportunities that are arising. So just to point out that the Mountains of Opportunity Investment Framework was launched a couple of years ago, led by our partners ICIMAD at the COP26 in Glasgow. And basically what this is trying to do is have a framework to scale up investment across the 8 Hindu Kush Himalaya countries and enable investment partners and different governments, private sector actors, a lot of different stakeholders who can align their work on mountain-specific climate priorities. So we bring it back, and my colleague Deepshika will speak a little bit more about this later. So I'm going to leave it there. We have some wonderful keynote speakers who I'm going to welcome now. So for now, I'd like to hand the floor over to Matthias Bachmann, who is a senior policy advisor at the Swiss Agency for Development and Cooperation. And we're so happy to have you here today. So Matthias.
Thank you, Alex, and good morning, dear participants, dear colleagues. It's a great pleasure to be here, and I thank Adaptation of the Altitude for the invitation. I think most of us know the data, and Alex also expanded a little bit on it, but it's worth always repeating the importance and the challenges, the opportunities indeed that mountains bring to climate action. I mean, 1.2 billion people worldwide live in mountain areas, 90% of these people in developing countries. And of course, mountains have a very rich, high biological and cultural diversity. And they provide, as Alex said, a lot of important ecosystem goods and services that are not only accessible in the mountainous areas, but also downstream. A lot of them are related to the cryosphere, climate regulation, water, fresh water, energy, of course, as well. There's a linkage to climate mitigation, and so on. 2 billion people, I understand, only living downstream from the Himalayas in the Hindu Kush rely on fresh water from those mountain ranges. And I think worldwide it's half of the population that depends on fresh water provided by mountains. Mountains are also highly affected by climate change. You've mentioned, Alex, that the changing water cycle, precipitation, and so on. I won't repeat that. I think we are here today specifically to talk about the money. That's an important aspect. As we know, the costs and gaps are huge. The UNEP at the latest gap report does provide the detail. Just to figure 2 numbers from that study. Climate loss and damage in the Hindu Kush Himalayan areas amounts to $45 billion from 1984 to 2014. Another example is in the Andes in Peru. The yearly costs only for energy provision of glacier shrinkage is $740 million. So a huge impact on the economy and livelihood of peoples in that country. I think we have to be cognizant, though, that costs are not only monetary. Not everything is, apt for a price tag. It affects lives. It affects livelihoods. It also affects cultural identity and diversity in those regions. So what can we do? I mean, in terms to leverage more funds. And I think one key message here is, and all the modeling and forecasting we are aware of does actually demonstrate it, and it's common knowledge, acting now is much cheaper than acting later. So there's a real urgency there to leverage more funds and to make sure that they go to the right places, including to those people that are most vulnerable and core. Starting point for us really is to raise attention and to make sure that the right data and knowledge is available. And this data has to be put into a coherent narrative. And we have to put out this narrative to decision makers, political decision makers, but also economic decision makers, investors. And I think events like these are actually, important in that regard. Secondly, and based on the first point, we need to have the right strategies, policies, but also projects and programs that are actually investable. And we have a good example here with adaptation and altitude. Thirdly, then we need to have the money. So public investment obviously is going to be an important bedrock for adaptation finance and will continue to be so. But we all know, and looking at the figures, that public, even if we increase it, even if we double it, as asked by the Glasgow Pact, even if we triple it, it won't be sufficient yet to cover all the needs. So we also have to seek smart ways to bring in private investment. Now, what are private investors looking at? They always have, basically, to simplify, an equation between risks and between rentability, between rents. Through smart state intervention, we know that this equation can be changed. So-called blended finance approaches, guarantees, et cetera. So these have to be used more forcefully also for adaptation in mountainous areas. And we know that's not easy. It's much easier, for instance, in renewable energy, where the so-called business case is easier to make, but it is possible. And I think we have a representative here from the GCF today. The GCF actually has put forward some really promising projects in the last few years that actually hold the potential to mobilize private finance for adaptation. My last point is that mountains, but also climate action, climate risks don't stop at borders, right? So we have to really indeed work regionally as well. Not doing so would really be a lost opportunity. With that, I'm looking forward to this debate today, and thank again to the organizers for inviting me.
Yes, thank you so much, Matthias, for joining us here today. It's always good to get such a good overview about the importance of mountains for adaptation. Next, I'd like to welcome Dr. Deepshika Sharma, who comes with us. She is a climate environment specialist at ICIMOD and will be giving us a little bit more insight from the HKH.
Thank you. Thanks, Alex, and thanks, Matthias, for setting the stage. And a lot has been already talked about mountain opportunity and HKH perspective, and also the gaps in the adaptation, report, and which they are very key findings. So, can I have change this? Yeah. I'll just talk about the journey of Mountains of Opportunity Investment Framework, which started in COP26. 2021, I would say, and with our internally, when we found out a lot of gaps in the NAPs and the NDCs of the HKH member countries for ICIMOD, we realized that there is an urgent need to develop an investment framework, specifically focusing on mountains, to leverage the investments, to mobilize the investments, not only from the public sector, but also from the private sector. So just to talk a little bit about more. So what are we looking at? We are looking at these transformative partnerships, which and enabling and catalyzing investment opportunities at various scales, directed towards climate action and green economies in the Kushimo. Now, this is a very interesting, I would say, a diagram. A little bit has already been explained by Alex. I would like to mention here, what are we looking at? So there are 6 aspects which we are looking at. We are looking at resilient and inclusive labor ecosystem, which is very, very relevant from HKH perspective. Resilient mountain infrastructure, mountain-specific nature-based solutions, inclusive and climate responsive rural habits, shock-responsive social protection system, where you were talking about risks. So how we can cover for the risk for this, specifically for the communities and people. Then last but not least is the resilient mountain entrepreneurial ecosystem, considering MSMEs. and others as well. Now, at ECMOD, what we're trying to bring into is the evidence-led decisions to channel these investments to the priority areas. How are we going to do this? We are looking at two aspects. One is developing this evidence. Then secondly, improve connections and partnerships. So various stakeholders, not only public sector, but private sector. So we started with an approach of twofold approach. One is getting knowledge and scaling groups. And secondly, an investors alliance. Now, past 2 years, we have been focusing on developing these knowledge and scaling groups. Currently, we have prioritized only 2 sectors. One is on renewable energy and livelihoods, and secondly, on nature-based solutions, specifically linked to water. And then we are also looking in the investors alliance, how to build that, how to strengthen the partnership as well. Third, I would say, like to mention, is the needs and the opportunities for investment is understood. How are we going to do this? What is the approach? Because, of course, there are many alliances already, there are many partnerships in place, but if you see, there is nothing specific for the mountains, and especially from our perspective, from ECMOD perspective, is edge case. So we are looking at bringing the evidence from both science, policy, and practice, identifying the investable projects, advocating for these investments, promoting needs and investment opportunities, and providing opportunities for various stakeholders to interact. And of course, we are also looking at a very strongly at the JC, aspect of it, because from mountain communities, where ECMOD is looking at, is mainly primarily in the rural areas of mountains. So this is what I would just like to talk about, Moif. And in terms of the HKH perspective, I think we have already listened to Matthias when about the population size and the how it is impacting downstream. But going forward in this, what we are going to achieve is now the next steps is to develop these investment pathways. So what we can do. So we are looking at work to identify and develop solutions into the business cases. That means strengthening the supply side as well. Playing a role in assisting HKH countries to access these global funds. So we already, I'm looking at Bapan. Partner to facilitate investment into private sector. Convene investors and investment enterprise to close these gaps. And partnering with, of course, with existing alliance. It could be, these are the 5 investment pathways which we have been talking with our different partners, and we are vetting them, trying to build the evidence around it. And it could be combination, it could be on standalone as well. And as next steps, going forward, this year, I would say 2024 now, is collaborate to build the framework, Mountains of Opportunity Investment Framework, with the Investors Alliance members. And definitely exploring the opportunities for investments in HKH region, and of course, with our other partners on other mountain regions as well. And then initiating these project development, starting the process in itself with the partners. So with this, I would like to stop, just giving an overview of what ECMOD's work is all about on investment framework. Just to mention, this work has already been endorsed by Government of Nepal in COP26, and now supported by all our member countries. So we already are working very, very closely with our regional member countries and the governments to develop this investment framework further for HKH region. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Deepshika. I think that was a really interesting presentation, also in pointing out that while we're mobilizing funding and making a lot of these strides, it's important to also have mountains included in there. It's something that's not always brought forth. So now I'd like to switch gears a bit and welcome our panel speakers to join me here at the front. We're going to have a discussion with several key experts who I'm going to do introduce them as I pose them their first question, just in order to be efficient in time. So please will you all join me here at the front.
I go here, so we're a woman, a man.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So thank you all. Just so we know, the microphone is the one floating there between all of us. So very appreciate having all of you here. I will start my first question with Dr. Bapun Fakhrudin, who's joining us as a water resources management senior specialist from the Korean Climate Fund. And just start off with you. So first off, we have been hearing now, of course, that mountains are not always something that's being put at the global scale. It's not something that's being talked about in terms of climate change. And until recently, mountains have also not been a main thematic priority area for the GCF. However, there are a lot of different projects and proposals that come your way that also have a lot of impacts for mountain regions and a lot of the sectors that are relevant for them. So my first question to you would be, can you provide a good example of this and kind of why it stands out, and give us some insight from the GCF's perspective and maybe be helpful to those of us?
Excellent. No, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure to be here today, this morning. As you maybe know, that the GCF is a country-driven organization. So that means we are a second due diligence organization. We work for the partner, and then the concept or the project need to be designed, or gaps need to be identified by the countries to bring into the project as the GCF financing. But one of the challenging as we face from other side to see actually a complete integrated package, what actually the Isumud just presented, that a framework which actually talks about whole integration between the hill to ocean. So you're talking about atmosphere, land, mountain, everything. But when you're looking at the project, you don't see actually those kind of projects often actually coming to the pipeline. And I think there's between the gaps, what you thematically producing as a research, but how that research actually coming to the operational domain to packaging as a project. And someone need to play a catalytic role here, probably advocacy agency or a regional entity who actually support to the country to packaging those kind of projects to bring it to the GCF financing. And also, once we like to develop such kind of project, we also need to understand the modality of each of the finance has a different modality, either adaptation fund, JEF, or GCF. So we have a different investment criteria. So we need to also try to understand how actually those fit into the GCF criteria. But one of the uniqueness for us is actually that GCF that will try to look at a paradigm shift, which means actually not only just financial sustainability, but also how you bring the innovation into the program. And I think we always prefer to have such kind of integrated project. And coming from a water background, mountain is quite important because the mountain is the source of your fresh water. So while you're actually looking at that, we always try to look at how we can actually package a more innovative, little bit thinking out of the box, more integrated project for countries. Looking at the future perspectives, as you maybe saw that there is a healthy replenishment has been announced in the COP for the GCF. And we're looking forward how we can actually get more innovative project in this particular space. We started actually looking at specific priority to mountain countries, but it's still actually the pipeline project concept note is not that healthy or comprehensive that could actually go quite faster to the project origination to the board approval. And one of our biggest criteria is to support the direct access entity, what we call, which is like a countries rather than the international entity or regional entity, so that we like to support directly to the country, and that's the mandate for doubling the. So if a country like in Nepal, if the country can get one project, they should get at least 2 more projects in the next phase. And that's the beauty and opportunity for mountain countries to package your project. And if you need a help, reach out to the agency who actually supporting or have those kind of technical expertise, or reach out to us. And we also move out from our traditional post office box, like you just provide us a concept note, rather than we like to do a co-design approach. So if you have an idea, if you have a barrier, your risk, have a meeting with us with your some ideas, a one-page ideas. We can guide you that what could be the investment criteria, how that could be fit, and how that could be bring into properly to the pipeline to faster process. And there are several windows of opportunity has been created, because in the past we were like a one size fits all, but that doesn't work, because even in the mountain countries, each country has a differential need differential capability and strength. So how actually you can customize those kind of windows is quite important as a GCF. So we have several windows such as SAP, which is short application process. We have a PAP, which is a normal project. So there are a lot of acronyms in GCF. But even if you are not a accredited entity, but if you have a super cool idea, we also actually provide one-off project accreditation. So you can actually, that called a PSA, which is project specific accreditation process. So for an example, if Mood, they like to bring a super cool idea for the mountain using this framework. I like to see one project. You can come up with a PSA. And that's a good opportunity, and it could be a regional, because if you have a connectiveness with the countries, you just need to get an endorsement by the country and how that could be bring into GCF pipeline. So those are the opportunities there. And also, as we maybe know, that GCF is an agency where we like to catalyze the funding for incubator to acceleration. That means if you did a research which has the evidence based, you can come to GCF to accelerate that to the whole country or whole region. So that's the beauty here, because there is no upper limit of the funding cap. So with these things, I like to see actually more projects from the mountain, and we are there. If you need any advice on the water, we'll be happy to support. Thank you.
Thank you. And it's really interesting also, talking about how you have proposals maybe coming directly from the countries instead. Now, the issue with mountain areas is often, they're transboundary and have a real regional component that's very necessary. We'll hear a little bit more about that shortly. But how can these projects be packaged in a way that's maybe more attractive for GCF? Because there has to be that type of regional, either governing structure or body that can kind of control that.
Yeah, I can just maybe add one more point here. Two aspects we try to look at. We have a 6 investment criteria, so which is impact, potential. You need to show a mitigation impact, paradigm shift, which is actually doing things differently, and as well as how actually you can mix the program sustainability versus financial sustainability, and how you match with the SDG framework. Then it's a country ownership, because this needs to be through the NDC process and NDC and NAP process. And that's maybe one of the gaps. Often actually NAP doesn't quite highly reflect the mountain specific challenges. And then it's more on the ownership. So that country owns that particular project. And lastly is efficiency and effectiveness. But then as a GCF, we like to see actually the blended financing opportunity. We are designing some project where actually we can bring private sector and public together to making a circular economy kind of opportunity. And I think that's the beauty the other organization can take, because GCF is a highly risk appetite organization, and it uses all sort of instruments that maybe the private sector required, either equity, a guarantor, result-based financing, a highly concessional loan, as well as grant. But the way the world is moving, grant-based financing will not be able to solve all the problem. And the money that you need, nobody has those money. So you have to think about the private sector engagement, because they have those kind of financing that could be, generate additional revenue for the country. So we need to look at a little bit differently how that could be managed and packaged. But that also has a lot of challenge for developing country to first, engaging on those kind of things. But we have a readiness financing on the other side, which with the new readiness framework, the country can access up to $7 million for 4 years' time. So if you look at some of this mountain country, a 7 million probably more than their development budget in a year. So, and you can demonstrate a quite good activity if the country actually like to have. But the biggest caveat here again, actually the cross-domain or cross-sectoral integration. Often our climate finance is actually based in Minister of Finance or Minister of Environment, but the sector those are suffering are Minister of Water Resources, Agriculture, and others. And there is not much that kind of interconnectedness or the prioritization, because of the NAP doesn't actually discuss in that way. So how actually we can actually balance those things, and where is the trade-off? That may be the biggest area we need to look at. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, next I'm going to turn to Alenka Smerkolc, who is, she's held many senior positions in her home country of Slovenia, including director in the nation's largest banking group and as Minister of Development and Cohesion Funds for the Slovenian government. And now in 2019 has become the first woman to be appointed the Secretary General of the Alpine Convention. So we're very happy to have you here with us today, and can maybe shed some light on the regional perspective, of course, too. So I was wondering how the Alpine Convention, as this is one of the prime examples of a regional mechanism for mountain areas, can help actually trigger funding for projects, and how that works for you.
Yeah, first of all, I am very happy to be here, to be invited and to be a part of this panel, because I think this is really one of the crucial things, especially if you come from the mountain area. Perhaps first, so for the ones who don't know the Alpine Convention, we were born out of a vision of a few, I would say, individuals 32 years ago, and with one singular objective, which is to protect the European Alps, and on the other hand, also ensure sustainable development. So 8 countries, all of the countries of the European Alpine Arc form a part of the Alpine Convention. So basically through governments, and also European Union is a member, a contracting party, which helps a lot. So when you try to then figure out of how and what I could say today, as far as the how we do perhaps, or how we try to leverage funding, what kind of funding opportunities we have, it's very, very different to what the needs of what we saw before are. But I think what we can, or what I could add to this panel, is how we do it, because I think that at the end of the day, this can be a bit replicated, at least in some forms. I think that first of all, if you try to push mountains forward, a regional mechanism is something that really is important, because you can shout louder. I think I would go back to what I mean. It's from an investor perspective, you have a larger, not just investor base, but also the strength of showcasing and providing the narrative. I would go back to what Matthias said. We need to provide the narrative. So this is what we were trying to do all these years. And this is, let's say, I would say that the first step. Then you need to have the framework, and you need to have the program on what you work. We have very clear priorities on what are our basic, let's say, priorities, and it's climate crisis, so it's climate change. Whatever we speak about here, we can package there. It's biodiversity loss, of course. The second thing, and the third one is quality of life, which provides support for the community, which is everything else. So when you have this part, it's and it has been confirmed by governments, of course. This is where you can say, well, this is what we strive for. This is what we need, and this is what we need the funding for. The funding is the crucial part at the end, even though, of course, Alpine area, I mean, we come from the perspective of the development world. This is the richest part of the world. So we are on the other side, but also in the Alps, communities, people, they also have a lot of issues. They also need funding. And of course, not all the projects, as we know, are investable in with the, let's say, from the investor point of view, from private investment. So yeah, I think that here the most important thing is first to cry out, build a mechanism, and build a framework with a support, because you will always need a support of governments. The sad truth is that with the climate crisis especially, but also biodiversity crisis increasing, the eyes of, let's say, governments are opening, and this will be perhaps the only help. So for us, how it works as far as funding is concerned, each government within the Alpine Convention, when they have a sort of framework, and they know we need to somehow try and finance projects in the Alpine area on climate adaptation, climate crisis. We have one prime example, which is, I don't know, Germany. Yes, it's they organize meetings, they try to build partnerships, so you have to come there, and they definitely finance projects which are a part of the framework and are not investable. So whatever is investable, like renewable energies, nature-based solutions, whatever you can get private investment on is out. So we are only speaking about projects which are projects for, let's say, climate adaptation for the communities, for people who need finance and would never get it in a different form. But project-wise, and the more partners you have, the better option to get financing. So I think this is, I would say, a sort of a prime example. And of course, for the European Union as per se, if you are a part, we try to push our priorities also in projects that are funded by the European Union. And this is, I would say, by far the biggest pot we get. And here, I think the only comparison would be multilateral institutions for the development world. But trying to build projects which are good, at the end of the day, a good project can get financing. That's the, let's say, the end idea, but it's never going to be easy.
So we hear a lot of building, that's building projects, building mechanisms, building partnerships, and also a narrative, which I think is very important to have this kind of narrative behind mountain issues.
And you need research
To actually
to come to
Yes.
the narrative.
It's important to have a good
Yes.
scientific backing. Absolutely. And I think on that, I will turn over to Dr. Nuran Atmirzaev, who is the special representative of the president of the Kyrgyz Republic on mountain issues, who's had many years of experience at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Kyrgyz Republic. And I've heard also once defended a thesis on AI many years ago as well. So coming out to us from Kyrgyzstan. So Kyrgyzstan is the spearhead of the 5 years of action on the development of mountain regions. We're currently in the 5 years of action, for those of you who don't know. So this is also about building a narrative behind needs in mountain areas. So countries do have a lot of different priorities for their climate work. We know this. And mountain areas do have cross benefits for many different sectors. So I thought maybe you could talk a little bit about how mountains can, how countries rather can bring in mountains to their proposals that have this type of cross-sectoral approach and cover a lot of these different issues.
First of all, thank you very much for inviting me to this very important side event. And mountains have a very diverse climate by altitudes, and one mountain slope can significantly differ from another. This climate diversity and rich biological diversity of mountains require special attention in climate adaptation planning. Transboundary cooperation can bring the common understanding of mountain regions and issues, integrate many priorities where we can combine the local livelihoods and biodiversity conservation. For example, pastures and forests in the mountain need adaptation and conservation measures, but they also serve as important carbon sink and need to be considered in mitigation context. Same with hydropower. It is the source of zero carbon energy, but climate impacts on glaciers and water flows can affect hydropower. Therefore, adaptation thinking and measures are required. Thus are some examples of cross-benefit for sectors. Naturally, downstream countries and communities are affected by what is happening in the upstream mountain countries and areas. It requires regional cooperation and consideration of mountain areas in national and regional plans, as the General Secretary of Alpine Convention also mentioned. And Kyrgyzstan is contemplating the Tianshan Convention, which can play a central role for realization of regional initiatives and serve for the integrated mountain development, relying on road-tested approach in Himalayas, Alps, Andes.
Yep, and I think that it's also very important to ensure that all mountain regions are represented by these type of mechanisms. So it's good to hear that there can be some really regional collaboration and sharing also for things like this.
Yeah, of course. First of all, thank you for that. You use logo of 5 years of action for the
Yes.
development of mountain regions, and we need to use the momentum and use opportunities and financial mechanism for Green Climate Fund, debt swap for sustainable development, and other financial instruments, including the emerging mechanism of loss and damage highly relevant to the mountain areas. We are not much different from the seeds. People, forests, and animals have little flexibility in the mountains, while disaster increase and glaciers and ecosystems are being lost. 5 years of action can help in getting attention to the unknown of underestimated problems of mountain regions. In Kyrgyzstan, we consider 5 years of action at global, regional, and national level and have launched a roadmap. It was developed by the help of UNDP, FAO, by the patronage of residence coordinator of UN system in Kyrgyz Republic.
Fantastic. And then I'll turn over to Sohail Malik, who is currently co-managing the Climate Resourcing Coordination Center, which is facilitating both public and private entities in developing bankable projects and accessing climate finance. So we've talked a lot today about the different public mechanisms that are available and all the different public finance that we can get. And often this adaptation funding has traditionally come out of public financing mechanisms. But you work in a little bit of a different sphere. So I thought maybe you could give us some guidance. What is it that you would tell projects who are looking into breaking into private financing mechanisms and have a little bit different source there?
Thank you very much. I think I wanted to continue from where Bapun left.
Yes.
Because I was also earlier with GCF as the portfolio head for 4 years. So I have a lot of insights on how the projects perform and how the projects deliver, what is their effectiveness, and all those things. My humble view on adaptation and private sector is more from a practical sense, because I worked on both sides of the fence. Before I was with GCF, and now I'm on the other side where I'm developing projects. So it really gives me a good flavor. And I have worked with the MDBs and I have worked with government. So my issue is that adaptation has not been given the focus it deserved. Adaptation has always been, I call it a stepson of climate finance. Why I say so? Because adaptation has always been seen from the lens of development finance and not from the climate finance. So that is the fine, thin line where people do not understand that it is not related to development finance, it is related, when it comes to adaptation, it is related to climate finance. Why I say so? Because, as you rightly said, 98% is coming from public sector. That's a clear indicator. 1.6% comes from the private sector. Private sector is very clear. It's R&R, not the MDB R&R that you go for recuperation. It's a return, risk and return. They just have a very clear mandate. They will not risk without being very clear on the return. So what they don't find in, I mean, I'm going to make a wide statement because I've really reviewed the projects of all the different, I mean, GCF and different funds. What they find is that there is no clear articulation of how do you really spell out the scope of the project and how do you really spell out the adaptation part of it? How does it relate to the climate hazard? I'm just being very specific now. And how does it relate to the vulnerability or to the, I mean, resilience of the communities, the processes? I mean, you name it, everything across the board. So there is this thing which we all need to work on. One, we need to work on climate rationale. We have to be very clear for the private sector to come in. They mean business. They don't want to run around the pole and just saying that we'll get this, we'll have all these qualitative aspects. They say, where's the money? And they have very definitive roles. Each one of us knows in the room. If they talk about adaptation, if at all they do talk about adaptation, they would do the adaptation either for their own processes. That there are three roles, everyone knows about it, either for their own self or either for someone else, like banks and others. They will finance, I mean, purely finance, or they will support the products and services. These are clear things there. So behind it is all what we call risk. I underline 3 times risk. So how do you define the risk? How do you put value to the risk? And how do you really bring in climate finance to take care of the risk? Because in this, this risk and return platform, it is not in favor. I can tell you upfront, adaptation is not in favor of private sector. But we shouldn't stop there. Climate finance is supposed to turn it around and put it in the favor of the private sector. They take all the upfront risk. They give the concessionary financing. They take the risk, all kind of risk. If there is a failure, they take the first risk. What a great deal. I mean, if you talk to the private sector with clear terms, I mean, if I talk about mountain projects and other projects, tell them that this is where you're getting the cake cut right there. And that's where your profits start from. I'll discuss on the cross-cutting projects also, but that's a later part of it. I'll come to that. But my main thing is that in our work, we have found out that private sector is missing from the books of the government. Sorry to say that. The government doesn't know how to deal with this elephant in the room. They're not clear that's how to bring them in. They want to stay away from it. Until and unless there are clear, partnerships. I'm not talking about bringing them in. I'm talking about a partnership with private sector between government and in developing NAPs, in developing NDCs, in developing the action framework of all these documents. If the private sector is not brought in at that stage and they're told that this is where the money is, we will put in the money for the risky part of it, climate finance. You come in and you accelerate. You provide the acceleration, you provide the scale, you provide the replicability, what was talked about paradigm shift. So, I mean, any fund you pick up, 6 clear GCF paradigm shifts there. It talks about impact. It talks about, I mean, if I'm making at this moment a theory of change, I would really invite whosoever is developing a project, 2 or 3 things, please, for private sector to come in, be very clear yourself on the climate rationale. Very clear. I mean, from end to end, the overarching I mean the script. I call it script because I have my team. I tell them you are script writers. You're not specialists. End to end, it should have a climate rationale very clearly spelled out. 1, 2, go with the Paris Agreement. Goals. Talk about bringing in. Talk about real-time stakeholder engagement, not just tick box that I've discussed in this group, I've discussed in that group. We do it in the beginning. We because in our processes, I've seen in the private sector, we started. We are doing a project on startups and in climate startups. We started with financial tool and with the partner. And when we did the stakeholder engagement, we came with a different partner and a different financial tool. Because they said, don't use grants for start. These grants are opium. They will just grow. They will turn into assets, big houses, cars, and then they'll collapse. So don't do it. So what I'm trying to say is stakeholder engagement, bring them into planning, bring them into, this is Article 6. I'm talking about 7.1 of Paris Agreement. Just please, when you're developing the projects, put that into action. And private sector will come in. I assure you, I've been given last year in COP27, I was doing this training for Egypt government. And I was there in COP27 on the bankable project. But we have short time. I don't want to go into details. But I can go into details that what are the key anchors which a proposal developer should or a proponent should look into it if you want to bring in private sector in real time. Otherwise, you will have people come in, take the best of it, and leave the rest to the community. Sorry, I'll stop here.
Yep, unfortunately, time is really flying by, but this is a very interesting discussion. So I wanted to give the opportunity if anyone in the room did have a question, and if not, I have a couple other ideas. Okay, I think, no? Okay, so then actually, I would be really eager to hear some of these key components that you just mentioned, actually. What is it that you set out? I think we all want to engage the private sector and understand how to mobilize this funding, so.
What the way we do the projects is that we, as I mentioned, that we go with the stakeholder engagement. We do serious feasibility studies, market studies, because you need to have evidence-based things to develop a financial model, which people call it commercial returns and all that. Those are all covered in there in your financial. I'm not a financial guy. But when I look at a financial model, I can see where the returns are. And if I can see it, the private sector will very well just smell it, not see it. So you need to really be very, very clear on the financial model. It has to have a return, be it in any form. You're putting a levy, you're having a public private partnership. I can quote you, not even this year. If anybody of you have heard Malaysia example. Have you heard about SMART? SMART, excellent, 2007. I never knew. KL Center, there are 2 rivers coming together and they have flooding, flash flooding. And they were having economic losses. The center were closed down with the flash flood, which would happen just for a couple of days. So they built a SMART. It's a stormwater and a transport tunnel. They built that tunnel in 2007, 3 levels, connecting 2 reservoirs at both ends. So the lower level would be the stormwater, is the stormwater, not would be. Now it is in operation, and it is built with private sector. $500 million project, 350 million government pays, 150 million private sector pays. They get the toll for only the 3.7 kilometers. It's a 12.7 kilometer tunnel. 9.7 is the stormwater. And once the flash flood comes, they close the two ones. And they are done so immaculately. They first forecast, they clear the traffic, then they push the water through. It's worked beautiful. And then at the end, they clear the debris, they clear the things for the traffic. 500 million, 1 billion they have, saved from the flooding. 1.5 billion from the traffic, they've put the levy, and the revenue stream is very clear. So from a 500 million, you're getting a 2.5 billion. Maths cannot go wrong. I mean, this is a dream for any private sector guys. And those two, 50-50, they had this partnership. One was a mining company because it was a turnout. Then second was the biggest engineering firm of Malaysia. So that project, please, if you have time, go through it. And I can quote so many other projects which have adaptation. Now, this is adaptation mitigation. BCF. When I was there, we were having clear distinction between public, private sector projects. In the end, public sector projects went up, private sector remained. Now, at this moment, the cross-cutting projects are 38% and the rest are less adaptation, because this is the key. You have to build in adaptation within the mitigation. Even if it's a mountains project, you need to bring in the carbon. I'll bring in the carbon credits in there. I'm sorry, I mean, this is a very controversial issue. But I mean, it's just an example. You can bring in mitigation aspects, in there. We are setting up a carbon trading center where in one of our provinces in Pakistan, we don't have money. Public sector is run out of money. So they cannot fund adaptation. So we are trying to, in KP, Khyber Pakhtunkhwa province, we are trying to set up the center which will pay for the adaptation, the carbon credit. Now, this is something which you need to do. If you have to really have you have to think out of the box. Private sector will not take anything old ideas that let's do ecotourism, things like that. You have to be a little bit more innovative. I'm not undermining those issues. Sorry, I mean, if I'm doing that, we have so much of experience. Even in this room, I'm sure we have 200 years of experience. So we need to use that. We need to learn from mitigation. If it was 98%, it has learning in there for the private sector, bringing in private sector. I'll bring that into adaptation. So these are a few things I just wanted to touch upon. And I'm sorry, I can go on because I have another panel at 11.
Of course.
So if you want to excuse me, I'll
Certainly. And I think that's really important, bringing adaptation within the mitigation sector. That's something that we have to look toward. So I will give the other speakers also a chance. If you do have any kind of key messages, key takeaways that you would want the listeners to take with them today, what would you say is something that's the most important for climate finance and for financing mountain projects? Alenka, maybe I'll turn to you first.
It's very difficult to speak after because I fully agree with what you have said. The truth is you have to go out and be as innovative as possible. Try to involve wherever you can. And yes, private investors, with the gap that we have learned, there is no government, and also multilaterals will never be able to finance this. So innovative solutions, as I call what you were explaining right now, and I have years like this, it's the only way forward.
Yeah. Okay. And what about from you, from the Kyrgyz Republic?
Yeah, I just can show some examples where mitigation efforts in my country enhanced the adaptive capacity of mountain communities. GCF FAO project is supporting forest and pasture management in Kyrgyzstan and contributed to both mitigation and adaptation efforts. Climate risk reduction project with elements of early warning system by UNDP and nature-based solution to disasters by World Bank Resilient project are improving adaptive capacity of mountain communities. We have major untapped potential of hydropower, plus other alternative energy sources such as wind and solar options, including decentralized solutions with direct benefits for mountain communities and energy security. And I hope that such solutions will find wide application and increase the adaptive capacity of mountain communities.
Yes, thank you. And of course, we are the Adaptation at Altitude program, but incorporating adaptation and mitigation together is still very important and key for also achieving the Paris agreements as well. So I'd like to thank everybody for joining us here today. If I can go to the next slide, perhaps not. But I would just like to share a few different publications from the Adaptation at Altitude program. We do have some brochures here in the room, but for those of you who prefer digital, if you'd like to check us out and learn more, we do have the brief on finance and mountains that I mentioned earlier, if you want to see more about that data. We're just now launching a brief about how mountains are present in national adaptation plans, in case you want to know how that applies to the adaptation sector. And finally, we do have a community space where we do have a knowledge network and a community of practice on mountain issues for experts and different stakeholders to connect on these issues and talk about solutions moving forward. So you can join that one on the We Adapt theme space. So I'd like to thank all of our wonderful speakers. We've dwindled down now, of course. It's a very busy COP, but thank you all for joining us here today, and have a great rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Remember